Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Xaereth Prevails, a Grand Arena story. We are back in the hunt for Kyber in Championships 3 Episode 2. We got off to a pretty good start. In Episode 1, we got the win against a guy who said that he did not take it seriously and didn't care about his attacks that failed, which I half believe, but we'll actually look at his results for this match as well at the end of this video, so stay tuned for that. Otherwise, we're still pretty far away from Kyber. There's actually been it's kind of frustrating. They've devalued Kyber just a little bit. You can see on the top left here in the screen, you get 1,600 for a win here, and previously it was 1,000 for a win in the match, and so that means we could probably win about 6 or 7 or maybe 8 rounds and still get into Kyber, which kind of devalues it. Like, I liked it being a pretty exclusive club, and it seems like a lot of people are going to be able to get into it. So, that's an interesting choice by CG. I hope that maybe they change the titles or something like that. I don't know. It does feel a little bit frustrating, but let's just dive into stats here now instead of griping. So my opponent had a higher GP than I did, which isn't any kind of surprise. A lot of people do in my pod. It's called a pod for a reason. A lot of them are whales. So, and I'm a dolphin, so I kind of belong here as well. I think dolphins run in pods as well. So my opponent had me beat pretty bad on the relic front just because they had 6 tier 7 relics, and then everything else was kind of close to even. I had some advantages here and there, but that tier 7 relic is really rough. In terms of geared characters, I had them beat on gear 13, which is probably the most important. They definitely had me beat on gear 11 and 12, so overall access to their roster was probably greater, but I also had more speed mods available, so kind of an even match. When we look at the stats here, though, it's kind of telling. You kind of look at my opponent's lifetime score, and you can see that they have 10,000 fewer lifetime banners than I do, which is kind of hard to ascribe a specific level of importance to that. It could mean anything, that maybe they just took a break one Grand Arena, maybe something clicked eventually, but not quite yet. Maybe they're back on the straight and narrow after a whole series of recalcitrant, awful decision-making. Who knows? The other numbers that are kind of interesting here are their defensive wins are way higher than mine, but at the same time, their offensive conquests have also been really high. I've conquered more zones than they have, but only by 8. Like, it's 100 versus 92, so that it's not really that big of a difference. So I was kind of expecting a lighter defense. I wasn't really sure otherwise what to expect, so let's just jump into it. I was actually kind of surprised at my opponent's choices for which squads to put in each of their zones, just because in this particular format, the only thing that's uncertain is one squad zone, and it's defended by 2 different squads. And so this squad with 3 teams in it is it's kind of distracting, and it's good to have that information because you eventually need to be able to take it out because of ships, but it's mostly irrelevant. The biggest factor is this squad zone here, and they only had like a Bosk team, and it was all gear 12, but no Django. It wasn't that remarkable. And then Kira team without any kind of teeth at all. Like, it was just a timeout team. Now, one thing that we discussed at length in my podcast that is linked to the video description, it's completely centered around Grand Arena Championships and the different strategies and tactics and everything surrounding that play mode, which is exactly like my channel basically. But the thing that we discussed was the different strategies for this new format with ships and with all of the changes. We have a 3-man squad zone, we have the 2-man squad zone. And the conclusion that we drew was essentially that you want to put some of your hardest teams in the 2-man zone that's blocking the other 2-man zone, because you want to cause as much uncertainty as possible in your opponent's decisions to attack. And my opponent had done exactly opposite of that. Like, I can easily counter either of the teams that are in this squad or in this zone. And once I've done that, once I've taken those 2 teams out, then I'll have complete knowledge of what other squads I have to be able to counter later.
What is this, amateur hour?
So as soon as I could, I jumped on and made an attack with First Order here against the Kira team. And First Order have a lot of great strengths against Kira specifically. You know, that she doesn't necessarily like having the 2-turn stun on them. I mean, almost no characters do. You know, there are a few that don't really care that much, but Kylo Ren's ability to 2-turn stun L3 is really great because L3 is the only one who can really disrupt you enough to be able to prevent you from taking out Vander Chewbacca, who needs to be your first target. You know, one thing to keep in mind, however, is once you've stunned L3, you want to avoid using the AoE from the OG Kylo, just because if you do use the AoE, then it's going to it'll hit L3 and she'll passively dispel a debuff on herself, and then if you use it again, she'll passively dispel another debuff on a different character. And so eventually it's going to become acceptable to do some AoEs with Kylo. I mean, you want to do the AoEs just because that's the turn meter train. You want to be able to, you know, give your guys as much turn meter as possible so you're going and your opponents aren't going. But just realize that you're trading off the turn meter in exchange for L3 passively dispelling debuffs. You know, and at some point you want to just target her and take her out, of course. One thing I want to point out here is the way I'm playing is just maybe a little bit skewed because I'm working on this feat. For First Order, I have to feed kills to the different Kylos, and you know, you have to kill about, I think it's 12 characters with one of the 2 Kylos in order to earn this feat. And one of the things I'm really trying to do this season is earn all of the feats. I didn't do that last Grand Arena, and even though I went 12-0, I didn't make the top 50. Even with full clears and pretty good scores. So, you know, and I attribute that to ignoring some of the Separatist feats. I got most of them, honestly, except for, you know, there were a couple key ones. So I think that would have gotten me into the top 50, which would have been nice. And, you know, it'd be nice to be able to win all my matches. I don't know if that's going to actually happen, but you know, that's the goal. And with that said, I want to put myself in the best position possible to place as highly as I can. Now, one really interesting byproduct of my opponent putting so many kind of subpar teams on defense in the front few zones was that I realized that I had too many kind of good teams to be able to counter all of them. And you know, that's an okay situation to be in, but it led to some interesting, like, okay, which team is more expendable here, and what team can I expect to get the most banners from? And I decided to take my Commander Luke team without C-3PO or anyone else against these bounty hunters, because these bounty hunters aren't anything special. Bosk is Relic 1, which is fine, like it makes him more resilient, and the team itself is pretty good, but it's not necessarily a really tricky team to be able to counter. And so you'll notice here my target priorities, like what I'm trying to do is just stun all the different people and dispel things. I'm trying to avoid getting these different AoEs on me, just because even though I have some good health and protection regen from the guard mechanic from Chewie's ability, I didn't necessarily have enough to be able to regenerate some catastrophic damage. So, you know, I targeted Boba early first just because his execute could really do a lot of damage to my overall banners. You know, and if I got unlucky, he would maybe be able to take out one of my characters. I wasn't sure. You know, but he also has a double tap against scoundrels, and 2 of these characters are scoundrels, of course. So otherwise, I'm just kind of making use of my different turn meter reduction abilities and stuns. And I did drop 1 banner here. 61 is still pretty decent, and I'm through to the next zone as soon as this animation for Bronzium goes away. And you know, one note is I've already made Bronzium. Like that was not something we were able to do in the last match, or round rather. So in the back here, my opponent had General Grievous and Geonosians, which aren't necessarily bad teams to run on defense. I think that they were just fine, but I already had complete knowledge of what my opponent had on defense now. It was too little too late. I think this was a little bit poor decision making on my opponent's part.
It's so damn hot. Milk was a bad choice.
So I decided that I was going to kind of jump around and use my different counters for these different teams based on the likelihood of failure, just so then I could reevaluate which teams I was going to use later on, just in case I did fail. I didn't really expect to fail, though. I was looking at my opponent's Night Sister speed, and, you know, I'd already checked it once, but it just seemed a little too slow. I don't know. You know, that's not really a slight on my opponent. They had decent mods. I've come to expect a little bit faster Night Sisters than this, and so Imperial Troopers do just fine against these Night Sisters for sure. You know, even though they have a couple Gear 13s here, and they're all Gear 12, and they're all decently modded, the fact is my Troopers are all way faster, and you know, with all my specific modding, trying to get all of my Troopers up to the ability to, you know, just chain all of their attacks just one after the other. This fight doesn't really last that long. You know, clocked in at just under 30 seconds and got 60 banners, which is great. It's efficient. It's a trade up in almost every case using Troopers against Night Sisters. So a really great start to this cleanup action, which this is really a cleanup action at this point. Like, we already know what all my opponents' teams are, and none of them are really that scary. And so I've skipped to the next zone, and I wanted to be able to counter this General Grievous squad with Watt. And, you know, this squad can be really problematic. Like, it could be a huge detriment to me if it was in the right zone. This isn't really the right zone. One thing that I thought was really interesting was that Watt immediately gave the taunt to B2, and, you know, I think that's just because my opponent had put more health and protection onto B2, and B2 is technically a tank, and so honestly, like, this would have been ideal if I had taken my Jedi Revan team against it, just because I could have targeted B2 immediately. But as it stands, you know, this was just fine. I wanted to use Darth Revan here just because this squad can be problematic, and I didn't want to lose anything. My opponent had clearly saved a ton for offense, and I needed to make sure that I was going to beat all of my opponent's teams without any fails. And so I did take the full team just in case. You never know what's going to happen against General Grievous. It does have an element of risk just because his AoEs do so much damage, and the Sith Empire squad is pretty squishy after a while, you know, with all their different debuffs and things that reduce their defense. So next I wanted to take a look at this Geonosian squad, and you know, if you use Traya here, which that's what I intended to do, you want to make sure that you're going to have enough characters survive the attacks, and my opponent only had one Geonosian at Gear 13, and actually it's two because Brute is also Gear 13 alongside Geonosian Brood Alpha. But, you know, the question is, can I go in with just 4 characters, or should I use all 5? And against a really heavily relicked Geonosian squad, I wouldn't really feel that confident going into it at all with Darth Traya, to be honest. Things can go wrong pretty quick if you're not careful, but against a mostly Gear 12 Geonosian squad, like 4 characters is enough. Probably 3 is enough, but I wanted to take Thrawn because Thrawn could pass his turn meter immediately to Traya. Traya could then isolate Brute, and that means that Brute can't do anything that is good with the Geonosians, and especially he can't taunt. And, you know, you want that to happen because, you know, all these Geonosians are taking all their out-of-activation turns, and, you know, they're all contributing a huge amount of damage. And so if you can just kind of shut Brute down, right, you know, before anything else happens, then all these Geonosians they're still going to be able to do some damage, but they're not going to be able to do as much as, you know, you're kind of concerned about. And so, you know, they're doing all these hits, but instead of having 6 characters hitting all at the same time, you only have a total of 4. And, you know, I used Fracture on the Brood Alpha, and you could see before the match started, I had checked the speed on the Brood Alpha to make sure that my Thrawn was faster, which he was. So that meant that I would be able to at least get Isolate off on the Brute. And then getting Fracture off on the Brood Alpha is also nice because that takes both Gear 13 characters just kind of out of the equation immediately. You know, and then the Geonosians are, of course, going to be doing their hits, but as you're continuing to just withstand their barrage, because the barrage isn't that potent with 2 characters kind of out of the loop or out of the rotation. Then you're just able to, once you withstand it, they're killing themselves because they're doing all of their out of activation attacks, and eventually you can just finish them off. So got an undersized win there, cleared that territory, and there's only 2 remaining teams here, and neither of them are really that scary. So the next most uncertain matchup here is, of course, the Nest team, and having a relic Nest is always a little bit nervous making, just because she does so much. She's so frustrating even at gear 12, and at gear 13 she's even worse. So I luckily had my Jedi Revan team available to be able to take her out. And, kind of the key with Jedi Revan against Nest is the fact that you can use your mark ability to decrease her max health every time you do a basic attack on her. And so eventually, once you get her alone, then she'll die pretty quick and easy. So my first target here, though, was Dooku, just because he can do some pretty gross things to my characters. If he starts stunning people, if he starts disrupting what I'm trying to do, it can really go downhill quick. So you can take out Dooku first. If you can, then you want to do that. And my opponent hadn't put any tanks in the squad, so there wasn't any protection for Dooku. I could just target him right off the bat. And then eventually I was able to take out Droideka. I did target Newt first before I took out Droideka, just so I could start working on Newt and try to get him out of his stealth, which that eventually worked. You kill him once, he comes back, and then wait for him to get out of stealth so you can take him out. Jango also ran out of his payout, which he gets automatically as a separatist now, which is great. It's a really cool mechanic, but it also ran out right at the right time, so I was able to just take him out. And now the goal here is just to mitigate damage as much as we can until we get Mark back onto Nest, and we had Mark available right away. So she's stunned and debuffed and everything, and now we're just doing a bunch of basics to reduce her health pool, so you can kind of watch her health bar shrink slowly. And it's really satisfying to see her just, as being stunned, while being stunned, just melt, basically. And so, I did take an undersized squad here just because it was absolutely easy to be able to beat this squad without the use of a max squad. But I did my AoE there hoping that I wouldn't take her out, but it apparently did take her out. But I did have max protection and health on everyone, so 61 banners against Death Squad. That's pretty good. It's a luxury to be able to take Jedi Revan against a team that just has Nest and a bunch of random separatists. That new squad can be good. It really needs a tank, though. It needs something else, a different squad composition. And that left Padme for this really undergeared Old Republic team. And I felt almost foolish taking this squad against the Old Republic. I almost took my Phoenix just for fun, but I decided I didn't want to risk that. I mean, it's Grand Arena Championships. I want to get the perfect record, and if I had a failed attack, I did not want it to be just because I got overconfident and took Phoenix to a fight that they couldn't necessarily win. And so I took my Padme squad. I did undersize it just because I wanted to knock out that undersized feat as quickly as possible. That was really huge in the final matches in my last Grand Arena Championship, to just be able to take a full 5-man squad without having to worry about that feat. It's a pretty big luxury to be able to have, and so I wanted to keep that up. And this was not a challenge. It wasn't hard. They did knock off a couple protection things, which I couldn't really avoid, but that was it. Like that's as big a matchup fail as possible. So let's move on to ships and see what kind of madness my opponent had done. So they obviously had put Negotiator at 6 stars on defense, which maybe it's not obvious. I don't know why people are putting that ship on defense unless they're feeling confident that they can take out your opponent's Negotiator on offense. But that's their choice, I guess. It's a personal choice, and I suppose I have to respect it. I'm really trying hard not to, though. You can see the photo above. It just shows all my opponents' different characters that are geared as pilots, and they're all way stronger than mine. Their Sunfac was only gear 12, which didn't make the cut for that photo, apparently, and this was kind of a different layout than I'd ever fought against before. Instead of Houndstooth in there, they had Sunfac, and that was just a big question mark to me. I didn't really know how that was going to mess with me. Sunfac prevents me from being able to target anyone else while I have a buff. And the fact of the matter is, like, a lot of my characters do have buffs. That's the way it is with most battles. And so I wasn't sure for a while. I finally figured that, if that did happen, I would at least be able to get a big hit on Jedi Knight Anakin, and that was the main goal here. So, you see Sunfac is blocking Anakin from being able to do anything to be able to hit. He did his AoE anyways and did some good damage. And the whole goal of this fight here is to hurt Anakin enough that the Negotiator AI panics and decides to put the buff on Jedi Knight Anakin instead of shooting Daze and doing its AoE and potentially ruining my knight. And that's exactly what happened. I did enough damage to him that they put the buff on him, and that let me put Daze on everyone. And you can see that Daze is already gone, but the damage is already done. Like, I was able to get that off, and everyone, we have a couple people in target lock now, so I can call in 5s, and potentially I'll be able to take out at least one ship with his AoE. And I was able to take out 2 there. That's the dream. That's wonderful. And now it's essentially just cleanup. Like, I have all of my ships remaining, and they're not necessarily the most healthy, but the ships that my opponent still has around are not necessarily going to be able to come in and save the day against me. I have a pretty overwhelming advantage at this point. And so, that doesn't stop me from wanting to get as many banners from this match as possible. We're always trying to find ways to increase our efficiency, and so I really love Plo for that. He can come in as the 5th reinforcement. He heals everyone, and then if you want to, you can heal everyone a second time and be able to get their protection and health just a little bit higher before you finish off your opponent's team. And so, way faster Negotiator than me in the speed meta, but I was able to still get 60 banners here. I know that that's not the max, but that's a pretty good result against a really way stronger team that a lot of people have kind of given up hope on being able to beat. So that's 2 Negotiators down. And I was pretty pleased with this score. Like, 1929 is pretty high score. That means I dropped 8 total banners across the board. My opponent eventually did attack. It took them a while, but they did, and they dropped way more than 8 banners. So even though they got the full clear with 0 fails against any of my squads, I was able to take home the win based almost entirely off of my efficiency. So you can see all my different squads here. I don't want to hide them. Eventually I'm probably going to change my in-game name just so that you guys who are watching won't be prepared for my defenses once you finally face me, which is going to happen eventually here. I do wish that I could see what my opponent used to counter me. They didn't talk to me at all this match. They joined the chat that I was in, or rather the chat that I invited them to, and then I proceeded to spout off a bunch of nonsense about coming and looking at my YouTube channels for feedback purposes and all that, and they just ignored me, or maybe they read it and just laughed at me. I don't know, but that does happen sometimes. I guess no judgment, or at least no overt judgment that I'm going to tell you guys about. But just because I'm not judging them doesn't mean I can't take out this sloppiness ratio chart here. I did that in a few of my different episodes in the last season, and it's a lot of times just used to base or to judge total efficiency for you on all your different attacks and everything. And this was pretty basic. I like to look at it after I failed a few attacks and my opponents have failed a few attacks, and we can kind of look and see, if we had been able to get perfect wins in those failed attacks instead, how efficient are we after that? Like, beyond failed attacks, how efficient are we? And so, I dropped 8 banners from the total possible, 1937. My opponent dropped 23, so I was about 15 banners ahead of my opponent in terms of efficiency, which I think is actually pretty solid. So I did take a screenshot of my feats, and I have 7 kills with the different Kylos, so only 5 more to go. I could potentially get it in the finals next time. I took this screenshot right after the payouts were there. You can see that we were only 2 minutes into the setup phase, and so I was rank 11. I'm now at this point, I'm at like rank 1,000 something, so not true at all that I'm rank 11, but I thought it was fun. I did get the win, and then I thought I'd show you guys my my holo projector that I got for my tank raid win that I didn't actually participate in, so that was pretty neat. And then you can look here, my finals opponent is named Dino or something, and my opponent from last round, the Dark Hero, won their match, so they clearly care at least a little bit about this round, despite their words that were so hurtful and discouraging from last time. So anyways, guys, I think I'm gonna call it good here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and remember that in all things, Xaereth prevails.